Hi, this is the first 20 minutes of the April Salon. It's only 20 minutes because, for privacy reasons, we had to leave the Q&A discussion, which followed on from this little intro between those of us who were present. Enjoy. Welcome to this month's Salon. I've been thinking really hard about trying to think of what to say in the current circumstances, because we're living through, through interesting times. It's stressful, actually. And I think that I would like to say that it's going to stop being stressful, but I don't think it is. I think that we're going to carry on having quite a sort of stressful time, especially now that Mars is in Aries. Which can be very fiery. And I was looking at today's chart, which I could get up for us in a minute, but I won't fiddle around with technology anymore. And we have got a conjunction today of Mars and Neptune, which happens, every couple of years. Mars comes around, has a conjunction with Neptune, but it's the first conjunction that Neptune is having with Mars in its own sign. So that does feel quite fiery. And as we all know, there's, a lot of war talk at the moment, and there's wars going on. And Aries is the sign of war, and Saturn may be a sign of boundaries, but Neptune is a planet of boundaries, but Neptune is a planet of no boundaries. So we've got this very fraught situation. And it's interesting also that it's all around, that there's all this stuff around gas and petrol and, the flow of goods through these straits of Hormuz, etc., or the non-flow, and also that there's going to be rationing of petrol. And rationing seems to me a very Saturnian thing. So I don't think this is kind of stopping anytime soon, just as a sort of general point. Also, I know that, as there are a couple of we're coming to the end of Uranus in Taurus. It's at 29 degrees. It's about to change signs for good. And this is going to be a big jolt, a big change, I think, even though we had it in Gemini last summer. And I actually looked back. I thought that I would just double check, because I wanted to make sure that where last time it went into Gemini was 1941 to between 1941 and 1942. It bounced back and forth in the same way that we've just had this bounce back and forth. And of course, that's kind of when the United States entered World War II. World War II had already been going for ages. Depending on who's talking, it maybe been going since 1938, the invasion of the annexation of Czechoslovakia, whenever. But 1941-42 is the middle of that period, and then Uranus stays there until after the war, or although, again, depending on who you speak to, when did World War II end? Did it end when the at Yalta? Did it end when the Berlin Wall came down? When did that stop? Because all of these stories fold onto each other and ripple into each other. And there's we'd like to think of these things as having very kind of certain and defined beginnings and endings. So even in our recent times, we could say, when did COVID begin? Well, we know when it began, but do we know when COVID-19 ended? Not really. People are still getting it, right? People are still have that. So these things kind of start and then they trickle on and they fold over into something else. But one thing I did notice when I was going back at these Uranian things, and I thought was really interesting, is that Uranus was discovered when Uranus was in Gemini. That's when it was first called Uranus, and that was, oh my goodness, that was back in 1781, 2, something like that, 1780s. But it was actually first spotted in the previous Uranus in Gemini, um, which was 82 years earlier, but they mistook it for something else. So they called it something else. So I thought that was interesting because Gemini, of course, is a sign of flight. And Uranus is a sign of, is a planet of science and innovation and explore, thinking bigger, thinking wider. And it just seemed to be really interesting that those two things were happening. And when Uranus goes into Gemini, it's going to start making this beautiful interaction with Pluto. So we have this thing, the Artemis 2, this rocket going around the moon. I'm not sure how we feel about that. For some of us, the Artemis missions are to do with this Pluto, Uranus, this movement into air. So I think that I never kind of, I think there's been a lot of fantasy about what space is really going to be like for people in space, but I think this is really, it may be that we are actually going into a new era of stuff happening in space. I think one of the things Artemis is almost a distraction because one of the really big things that's happening is actually all of these satellites being put into low space orbit. I can't remember how many satellites have been launched by Elon Musk recently, but he's launched a lot, right? And these can be really, really tiny things. And this is where there's going to be a lot of, I want to say there's going to be a big power struggle around low space orbit. And that's something that we're going to be seeing. Sorry to be so kind of definite about it, but I'm sure of this. We're going to be seeing a lot more of that, this power struggle in low space orbit, and also a struggle for. So there's going to be this is going to be an area of contention. Is this place in orbit, and what does that mean for us? Of course, I'm not interested in going into space, but I am interested in having my mobile phone working and not being eavesdropped upon. I don't want, it's, there's also going to be a struggle for for data and how we've become so dependent on that low space thing, on the orbit and on these satellites. And it's really bizarre and quite worrying that one person has so much control of that incredibly important thing, which is that orbit. And I think that what will happen with Uranus going in there may be that it starts to. Uranus is a planet that's about splitting or fracturing or things breaking up, as well, many other things as well, but it is about things fracturing, right? So it may be that obviously there's the power struggle going on, which is Pluto in Aquarius, but it may be also that that actually the power gets more divided up. I hope so. Oh, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent about the current times, but I think it's interesting to note and to know. So the other thing that's notable, well, I've talked about the straits and this water stuff. I was talking with Marianne earlier on just now. Some of you may not have been in here, just about how important water is going to be. Again, with Neptune in Aries, I think there's going to be fights around water. Okay, there's already this big problem on the Nile, with Ethiopia having done this massive dam higher up and holding back the water from Egypt and Sudan, because the Nile comes down and it meets the White Nile and the Blue Nile meet in Khartoum in Sudan. And that's just an example of our issue, how our issues around water are going to be a theme of the next many years as Neptune goes through Aries. And in this country, of course, we're having a massive fight again around water because our water has been so polluted. Fights around water are Neptune and Aries, right? And also Mars is coming in. So possibly something will be done about it, but essentially our water has been very badly polluted since being privatized in the 1990s by the conservative government of the time. Yeah, and there's a shortage in the aquifers from Sue saying this. Uh, there's been, and this water thing has been something that's been this lack of water. So we're talking about the very driest, one of the driest signs, right, that Neptune comes into. And Neptune, I think I've mentioned this before, actually, it rules the oceans, but it also rules the deserts, which is a very weird astrological thing. But there you are, it does, right? So there's going to be issues around water, and I think that we're going to be seeing those now, right? Why? Because this Neptune Saturn thing is really, really taking off as the sun has gone into Aries, as Mars goes into Aries, and then all these other planets are going to go in. And I think particularly as Mars comes in, which is today, we're going to be, this is all going to be very highlighted. We're going to understand that action is going to be being taken over this. So there will be fights around water. Yeah, I think if there's, I know there's some Californians listening, but I know my sister says, Los Angeles, oh my God, is, that's a place that is, if anybody's seen the movie Chinatown, it's all about the water. Okay. So that's sort of, I got very geopolitical very quickly, and just on the personal level, right? Taking all this just so we don't just end up worrying about the water. Okay, let me think of some nice things to say. Okay, so that's all a bit scary. This idea that there are going to be wars, water wars, essentially, and there's going to be space stuff going on as well. On the good side, those guys Artemis 2 went round the moon, and it was really interesting for a couple of reasons. A, that they did it, B, that there was a woman, and C, that they were all quite middle-aged people that did that. I noticed they were born in the 1970s, most of them, which is those people with who are having their Chiron return. Yeah, very middle-aged. They're having their Chiron returns, some of them. They must have been, because anyway, there's that. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about is we have these crazy people in charge, and we spend a lot of time thinking about their charts and looking at their charts, but we also are incredibly fortunate with, really, and it surprises me that this has happened, is that we have, at the same time that we have these very wicked people in charge, I happily use that word about them, people with very evil intent who are trying to split up the world and what's the word, extract, whose entire idea is rape and pillage of how things should be run. Then at the same time that we have the rapists and the pillagers running things, we also have this incredible Pope at the moment, who, unfortunately, I don't have his time of birth. And here's something really weird, as I was looking up, trying to find his time of birth. And apparently the hospital in which he was born, because usually with Americans it's easy to find their time of birth, but the hospital in which he was born was a nunnery or something, and they sold the building to some private company who just got rid of the records. So there's the only chart that we have for him is a noon chart. But I wanted to share that with you because why not look at the chart of someone who is at the service of humanity at the moment and who is talking about peace, which is, of course, what we should all be talking about and thinking about. So this is a noon chart. It's not his, that's not his birth time, although I quite like Sagittarius rising for a Pope. But I thought it was interesting that he's like a super Virgo. And Virgo is, by the way, that moon may be in Virgo, it may be in Leo. Just keep that in mind. But he's a super Virgo for sure, because he's got Vesta, Mars, Sun, Venus in Virgo. And if we cast his chart for noon, Venus goes to the top of the chart. Venus is the peace planet, right? She is the planet that seeks peace. She does other stuff too, but That's what you might look for. And Virgo is a sign that is in the service of either, it can be in the service of the planet, actually. It's not necessarily in the service of people, Virgo, but it's definitely a sign that is about helping. It's the helping sign. And he's very highly motivated, and he's in this sort of interesting sandwich between his son's in an interesting sandwich between Mars and Venus, between war and peace, right? And the Mars is a little bit far out from that, but it's still, the sun is in between those two planets, maybe bringing them and also in this chart you can see that Venus is moving away from Mars, right? So because Mars is the slower planet. But the other thing I noticed from him, as a prince of the church, he's got Jupiter in Leo, which is often the case with popes. You see some kind of princely thing, because that is literally what you are. You're the prince of the church. And it's far out, but it is kind of approaching that Leo, the Pluto in Leo. And the other thing he's got, which you might look for in a priest, is you might look for where Saturn is in a priest. And that's in Scorpio. So he's going to be a very persistent guy. I mean, he must have been a very persistent guy to have got where he is. Very brave and dogged, I would say. Saturn in Scorpio is a dogged placement. And it makes a conjunction with Juno. So he's got, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but, it's very interesting when you're looking for people who are very high achievers or very powerful to look at what the relationship is between Jupiter and Juno in their chart. You see it in a lot of presidents, basically, prime ministers. I think Xi Jinping has it. Putin has it. That conjunction. Those two things working really well together. But he's got Juno making conjunction to Saturn and Jupiter coming and squaring Jupiter, coming up to that Pluto, which are both very fixed. These are fixed signs, right? So there's a fixity about him and a persistence that I think is very telling. Also, that his Pluto at 27 Leo is actually on Donald Trump's ascendant. I find that quite interesting. So he is it almost feels sometimes like he is he's almost like the opposite of these other people who are, like the bad people trying to run things. He's shining a light on their wickedness, actually. And the 22 degrees is quite interesting of Gemini and Sagittarius, because that's also fits with Trump's chart very well. I'll get Trump's chart up for you so that you can see what I mean. Yeah, it's on Trump's sun, right? Trump's sun is at 22 degrees of Gemini. So Pope Leo is like his it's like in Batman, you have your nemesis. He's his nemesis, is the Pope. And what the Pope is saying about this is shining a light on the truth of the situation, which is that, peace is good, war is bad. It's really simple. We all know that. But it's so useful to have someone powerful saying that over and over again, which is what he's been doing. So that South Node on 22 Gemini is on Donald Trump's sun at 22 Gemini. So it's not even wide. It's exactly on it. So let's hope that his continuing persistence will bear some kind of fruit. And also, just looking at, and Donald Trump's Mars is at 26. So Mars is the warrior, is the war planet. Right, you can see it in his face. His very kind of red face, his orange hair, that whole look is that Mars in Leo rising on Regulus. So his Mars is at 26 degrees, Trump's, and the Pope's Pluto is at 27 degrees. So that's quite interesting as well. So let's just hope that that Pluto can put out the Mars, or at least help to, because obviously he can't do it single-handedly. But the other thing that is noticeable about this Pope and what he's been saying is that he's not pussyfooting around, really, in the way that many other leaders are not able to say what they really mean. He is just saying it like it is, like as he sees it. So where was I with general thoughts about the current transits of now?
I just wanted to swing back by the water thing,
Okay, go.
which just brings me to the real issue for me, since I'm in food, is that this is just another blow, along with lack of fertilizer, along with all the other things we've done to the food system in the past 20, 30 years, depleting the soil. It's all coming to a head into the perfect storm. And so I'm not sure that any of those folks that have such great ambitions for controlling the world are going to be able to deal with this, because one thing they are also, besides being so power monger hungry, is incompetent.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's probably worse than what their philosophy is or what their goals are, is the
Well,
incompetence.
I kind of think I have to say I'm banking on the incompetence
I know you
because
are, and I am too. And that's that's why we should really support, even on the most local level, because, by the way, this is everywhere. I mean,
back to the Nile. It's a really good example. I haven't got the dates for the Aswan High Dam, but basically what happened is that the longest river in the world is also a beautiful, clean river that comes from Lake Victoria and the Ethiopian highlands. And every year for millennia, it used to flood, I think, twice, and it would cover the land with silt and fertilize the land. So at the beginning of the 20th century, they thought, oh, well, we'll build a low dam at Aswan, and started to sort of mess up this cycle, which you can see as a cycle of life, right? The cycle of life. And then in the 60s, the Aswan High Dam was built, and it was like, oh, it's fine. We'll use fertilizer, right? Because all this fertilizer was coming out of the petrochemical industry. And that country, which was this amazing gift of the Nile, where those amazing floods were happening, was turned into this kind of was they stopped it. It's like they stopped the mother. It's almost like they stopped the Nile having her. I don't know. I want to say having her periods. You know what I mean? It's
yep,
like it wasn't allowed to happen, um, and became dependent on chemicals. And you could say, "What's? Oh my God, that would make an interesting study to see if it's how it connects with estrogen with women being put, the pill. Not that I'm against the pill. I like birth control for women, but um, it was around the same time actually that the Nile was dammed and women started using the pill. But these cycles, the natural cycles, have been interrupted in a way that is incredibly unhealthy. And Neptune is to do with chemistry sometimes. It's to do with chemicals. And so it's really interesting that these chemicals, I had no idea that we were so dependent on Qatar for for these fertilizers. I don't know if anybody else, if that came as a surprise to anybody else, but it did to me, that all those fertilizers come from there, from that one place, that they're all made there, and also that we've become so fertilizer dependent since the 60s.